And all right, here we go. Why are people still texting me?
They are. That's okay. Hi.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Oh, wait, let me get my
join. Oh, while you're doing that, I just want to shout out Al Dozier.
Al is the man.
Oh, he hand etched these for our conference. And this is a brother who was in the Air Force who in his this is his side hustle. He does this for organizations. And I mean, this right here is so.
And I don't drink enough water. I wish I look. I left mine. I got the orange one on purpose. I like to. It's in there by the bed, so I get up and drink water in the middle of the night with my. Thank you, Al. Those are beautiful. And ooh, that was a whirlwind. This time, Saturday we were in session.
Yes, we were. We were probably having our COVID panel, which was fire. And let me shout out all of the. First of all, the bags that didn't come, the bags will be mailed out. The company is going to mail out individually. Everybody's going to get their bag. For those,
I wish I could have been part of that conversation. I know you did.
Michelle Yaboa is, I think she is Dr. Michelle Yaboa, who's the wife to Dr. Nana Yao, who was on the panel.
Yeah.
The force of nature. She's about 4'11", but you do not want to mess with her on any level.
Hold on. Let me get this. Hold on.
All right.
Yeah, I'm on the Nubia app now. It's amazing all of this that didn't exist 15 minutes ago and is now everywhere. And I'm trying to get the volume now so I can see everybody. So how did you do everything?
It was all the people, you know, Karen Taylor Bass and her team. As I mentioned, Michelle and Tramel and Izzy. It was like people who were registrants who were just trying to help everybody. It was just so beautiful. Christy Purnell who knew she was a whole ass bishop who prayed us into the conference and then gave us our lives at the COVID.
We're reading her book. I mean, my goodness.
This woman. Oh, I mean, just you know, and I've never met her before, so it was like it was interesting to.
Oh, really? You must have said that at the very beginning because when I walked in, y'all had just started. So
yeah,
what?
Never met her face to face. She's only been on Zoom the whole time because we met during COVID, and so it was just Zoom. So it was that way with a lot of people. Never met Reyes. Next to Reyes, y'all.
Didn't recognize.
And we're chatting because I kept my mask on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're sitting there chatting, and he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Yeah, it was interesting. Never met you." He was like, "Yeah, I never met Karen. Never met Dr. Carr." And I was like,
"Telling you that."
I was like, maybe he's just being funny. And then somebody, Gerald Moore, who does tech for Young Brothers, he's a powerhouse. He came up to me, gave me a hug and everything. And then Urias was like, "Karen," and I was like, "What? We just stood there and talked for 10 minutes. Like you ain't recognize my voice." It was so funny, but that's how crazy it is because Zoom gives you a different perspective. People. We look the same, I guess, but maybe not. Maybe the energy's different.
Look, these 2 years of COVID since we saw each other, because that's the first time we've seen each other since I came up that last time we were together in the studio. And a lot of people have reacted differently to COVID. You just took the time to basically just get everything together. You did no wonder healthy, wealthy, and wise. You look great. I was like, look at Karen right here. Like some people said, okay, this is COVID. I'm gonna sequester and just lay down. They gained 5, 10, 100, 500 pounds. Other people went in the other direction. You went in the other direction.
I gained my COVID-19, but then I had that surgery, and the weight is not really good for the knees, and so I'm.
But you did something about it. It's one thing to talk about. It's nothing to be about it. And
I'm still in the midst. I got a few more pounds to get the LBs, but listen, we can't be around here shuffling and out of breath and not being able to, live our best lives. And we're going to Jamaica next year. So Jamaica, they got them falls, they got them hot springs. I want to be able to on a horseback and go see alligators and bamboo forests and all of the, I want to jump off of Rick's Cafe and
don't worry. And we gonna follow Dr. Almond all up into the Blue Mountains, following the Maroons, man. She know all the little spaces. She was talking about that Saturday. Good night. Yeah, you got to be in shape for anything remotely like that. No question.
I don't want to be like, y'all go ahead and tell me about it when you get back. No,
we know Black women. That's just not how y'all roll. Anyway, I know when we went to Kemet, the year after Asa made transition in 2007, we went back with oh man, about 100 Howard students and some folks from the Associations for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. And with that many young people, the dean of the college made sure that we had adult support. And Dean Donaldson, who is now an ancestor, it was a previous era. And the elders, he sent his people, his lieutenants, and several of them who are all now retired. They climbed in every tomb, temple, pyramid. And I'm looking at Miss Kemp, like Miss Kemp, Alma Kemp, who is my heart. She was his administrative assistant for many years, and now she's retired. Miss Kemp, you going? Yeah, I'm over here. And that was just the rule. My mom went in everything when she was over there. She's like 82 years old. She went in. I mean, black women, y'all just say, you know, well, we here. What do you think? I'm just gonna sit out here? I mean, and you know, some of those pyramids are no joke. The Red Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, Dashur, Maidum. You know, it's a narrow granite passage. And they just went straight down, straight up, and now standing in the chamber like, well, which of course, when you're 19, 20 years old, rewrites whatever your thought your expectation was when you see an elder go down in there. Now it's like, well, I got to go. You know, in fact, I just mentioned one other thing. We had a couple of young people, like a lot of us, who are claustrophobic. Well, that's, you know, so they did the best. When I tell you those black women, and my mom did a couple of times, okay, you talk about praying children in and out of a space. I'm over, no, just breathe, just breathe. Then he started singing one of them old hymns. I mean, it just, you know, there is no black community except the one we make. But in those moments is when you know there's something to this question of African spirituality. But it was those sisters. It was those elder sisters. I mean, just like Yvette. And then when they did it and came out, the claustrophobia not only disappeared from what that moment was, it was like it changed my life because now I'm not scared of closed spaces anymore because now I have a point of reference that I'm okay. It was real. I'm like, so anyway, I know you're going to go up into everything. And you gave that energy this past weekend too, Karen, in terms of, you know, that piece.
It couldn't happen unless people trusted and had also the wherewithal to do this. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know whether people would show up. I didn't know, you know, my biggest concern was make sure everybody came and left safely. I just wanted everyone to be healthy out and in, you know, like I just don't want anyone to catch anything on my watch. And so far, knock wood, everybody's good. But that was my biggest concern because we're in spaces now where folk act like there's no pandemic, there's no COVID anywhere. And listen, I don't want allergies, I don't want the flu, cold, nothing. So I'm good right now with the mask forever.
Forever. Including where we were.
Yeah, I mean, nobody had on a mask. Not the
was like, yo, is it over?
No, it's.
I mean, I went yesterday because I had a little bit of a crack of time. I went down to the National Museum, African American History and Culture. I go down to, you know, before COVID, I, you know, tried to make weekly trips to the Smithsonian. I mean, you know, we already paid for it, our tax dollars. And you know, to all the politicians who were talking about free college and no, there's no such thing as free. We paid taxes. So you just give us our money back because you giving them money. So give them our money. But I went down there yesterday and the black folk, with a few exceptions, had masks on like I did. And the white folk, many of them were maskless. And I thought about it because, you know, they've installed new scanner technology at all the Smithsonian. So those of you, when you revisit the Smithsonian, you know, you used to have to take all your stuff out and you go to conveyor belt. Now they got these things, which I'm a little nervous about. And I told the guards, I joke with them when I go down there because they all black, you know, black people. And I'm like, what is this thing? It's just two columns lit up and then you walk through and then you keep going. I'm like, so what did y'all scan and not scan? I got my bag, I got my keys, so anyway, I almost went back and I didn't and asked them, wait, is the mask policy dropped in the federal controlled spaces? Because I've seen a bunch of people in here with no mask on. Almost all of them white, but that's neither here nor there. Although Francis Cress Welsing, I expect, would make something of that. But there are people acting like it's over. And we saw a bunch of them this weekend, but we had our masks on. Because you required, we all, you know, we vaccinated, we took our tests. I took my PCR test, whatever, the day before, got my results. And so I felt confident that even if we didn't have masks, we would be okay. But we, you know, we don't play that. I'm wondering, how long do you think it's going to be before there might be a directive at the state, local, or even federal level that you must take the mask off?
That's going to be a problem.
I mean, first of all, do you anticipate that could even become a thing?
I think it's going to become like a social thing, like the way that DeSantis was like, oh, you don't need the mask, you know, because what it says, what it says is that you're selfish. That's what it says to me, that you're a selfish human being. So no one wants to be that. So we gaslight. This is a gaslight society. So you're not going to call me selfish. I'm going to flip it around and call you weak, or I'm going to call you stupid. I'm going to call, so I'm like, do what you want to do, but don't bother me.
Oh, that's going to be a problem. You're right.
So please don't come up to me and ask me a damn thing about why I have on a mask, because that's what's going to be a problem. So I just feel like it's going to be a social thing first. But they start mandating. You think those caravans of people mad because they're forced to wear a mask? Anybody that is consciously right now wearing a mask is not somebody you should bother. You shouldn't bother that person.
See, I wonder then if race can become, first of all, on the virtue signaling, yes. Because I mean virtue signaling, by anti-virtue signaling in terms of people without masks trying to intimidate people. I don't know if you saw the piece. It went a bit viral on social media. I'm only on Twitter and Nubia, so I don't really, but I saw it on Twitter last night during the it's actually the men's tournament, the NCAA, and parenthetically, shout out to Howard women's basketball team, my girl coach Ty Grace, all my students, all our students. They got their ass whooped yesterday by South Carolina. But you kind of expect
at the same time. Shout out Dawn Staley, but
well, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, Dobbins High School, Merle Dobbins. I worked for the school district, and I came to Philadelphia just after she left Philadelphia and went down to play for Virginia, of course, who she ended up coaching, and then of course the Olympian, Philadelphia's finest. And she was in high school at the same time that Hank Gathers and Bo Kimball were in high school. So they all came out of Dobbins. So I mean, you go to Philly, Dawn Staley is the queen of the city, and of course she coached at Temple, and now she's in South Carolina. And if you want to win a national championship, John Chaney, those days, I don't know, and you know better than I do. I don't know if the days of Rutgers and Temple winning national championships, the great C. Vivian Stringer, of course, who we've talked about coming out of Iowa, but before that, her and John Chaney at Chaney University, the HBCUs. I don't know that Dawn Staley could have gotten there from Philly. I know she tried, and it would probably have pleased her more, but getting to the slave economic concern, some people call it the Southeastern Conference, where you can cherry pick the fastest Negroes in the country. She could probably, I hope they win the national championship. So I didn't have anybody lose, but seeing Ty and those young sisters get in the tournament and then win a game, the play-in, where they play the Hunger Games to make you, be the sacrificial lamb. That meant a lot to those young people. It meant a lot to her. She, Brother Ken Blakeney, who's the men's basketball coach at Howard, and all of the Black coaches and players at the HBCUs. When we were there, we were getting ready to check out. I was almost late checking out because I was sitting there watching. After Howard beat Norfolk State, I watched Alabama State and Jackson State. And it just made me homesick for the South, because I'm looking at these Black women and men and these youngsters playing. I'm like, they're all HBCUs, but those deep South HBCUs have a different energy. But I still have to say that in the men's tournament yesterday,
because Dawn Staley, when she won her championship, you know how they cut off the net, they cut the net down.
Yes.
She made sure that every single Black coach in the country got a piece of that net.
You know what?
And that I was like, because this is we are so even though she beat the brakes, it was 44-4 at halftime.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, you can sit all your players, Dawn. Like, why you still? But that's that mentality. And she's a Taurian like we are. So I completely understand. But also the community part. I'm gonna win this championship, but I'm not here by myself. I'm gonna make sure I send a piece of this to every single Black woman, but every single Black coach.
I love that.
And so I got a piece of that rope from me. Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. And to her credit, it was tough. And in the social structure, and a lot of other people, they was clowning. Oh yeah, it's a slaughter. But in the second half, even though the score was lopsided, they scored about twice as many points as Howard, but not as many. So, she's no Gino Armorini or whatever that guy's name is up at UConn. I mean, him, what's the boy's name that was at UMass? He down there picking cotton in Kentucky. Calipari. Yeah. I was on campus that night. John Chaney said, I will kill you. I will kill you. And his players stopped John Chaney from going to jail that night. That little smarmy mouth John Calipari. But anyway, that's not Dawn Staley. So I didn't know that. That's beautiful. Of course, but that's who she is. That's beautiful. No, but so yesterday they Indiana was playing somebody, I forget, and the ball, the ball sometimes get wedged up at the top of the backboard, and so they'll get a broom or something, and they had one of the taller players on Indiana was out there, and the referee's a short guy. They tried to put him on a chair, and he couldn't get it. So then this white cheerleader, male cheerleader, walks over with this kind of diminutive looking. I don't know whether she was Asian, Latinx, but she wasn't white, cheerleader. And they do the thing where, they boost them up. And then he went up and her feet were in his hands and she picked up the ball and dropped it down. Everybody started cheering. Well, on social media, the Hicks, the hayseeds, the white nationalists said, oh, that was magic except for the virtue signaling, because both cheerleaders had masks on. So to your point, they've already started the take those masks off. You saw that cosplay Southerner, the governor of Florida, the illegitimate governor of Florida, because both those elections were stolen through voter suppression and throwing votes out, spoiling ballots. The one that made Stacey Abrams the governor of Georgia, but then Brian Kemp and figured out a way to steal it. So yeah, everybody cheerleading for that Georgia Secretary of State, Raffensperger. He helped Brian Kemp steal that election in Georgia. And of course, in neighboring Florida, Andrew Gillum should be the sitting governor of Florida, but DeSantis and his crew figured out a way to steal it. They had a Republican Secretary of State. But that having been said, when those kids were behind him, those children were behind him, he's like, y'all take those masks off. See, and I saw a black kid over there. One boy, he had his mask off already. The other kid had his mask on. I'd have been like, why don't you take it off? I'll get your moms to come over here and do it. Get your mama to come take it off. In other words, somebody gonna get their ass whipped out here telling people to take their masks off. In fact, I'm probably, it's probably already happened. I'm concerned though that if they begin to say you must take your masks off, which as you say, trigger a whole nother thing, that the burden could shift to us. I mean, because how long, and we these were all the jokes those first few months when we were sequestering, and then we started this. How many more times they're gonna let black people walk in the store with a mask on? This is when everybody else is taking them off, is what I'm saying.
Right. I mean, Ryan Coogler, the mask and the glasses, and I don't know if he's stealing money, and I don't know if he's a bank robber. You are making a point. I'm gonna see how it's gonna play out. But the thing that encouraged me when we were at the COVID panel, and I asked how many people have never had COVID, I think 95% of the people in our conference have never had COVID.
That's right.
And the average in America is 51%.
Yeah, the president of Howard, safe recovery, announced last night that he has tested positive, President Frederick. So wow. He said he had mild symptoms. But at this point, I was asking some of my, friends who are medical doctors, a good friend, Reba Kelsey, who's down at Morehouse School of Medicine, being one of them. I said, Reba, is it just going to be that we all got to get it at some point? This is crazy. Because when all those hands went up, I was like, on Saturday, I'm like, yo, look at all these people with their hands up that never had COVID.
Yeah, well, that's because we wear masks. I mean, Christine said it's not a secret. It's not anything magical.
No, it's not.
The tool is the mask. It protects you and other people from catching stuff. And I don't know what the problem is. If you don't want to wear your mask, don't wear your mask. But what you're not going to do is tell me that I have to take mine off. We're going to have a problem.
This is what
problem. And I hear what you're saying, Dr. Carr, but there's going to, please.
I mean, can you see it though? I can see it coming.
I can see it, but don't do it. That will be the last, the final straw for, I think, a lot.
That's true. And then some of us just everything, these severe circumstances have revealed things like everything else. When you burn something to its essence, the only thing that is left is the thing that can't be burned. I mean, it's the thing that you find at your core. I joked, and I still joke and say I ain't never got to leave here because it's just a lot more convenient to work. But I was very happy and energized just being around the folk, the Nubians, and all the folk who are in that larger universe, that hub that you've built over the years, and just being there and being in dialogue, being able to sit with Nkechi Taifa instead of being on the phone or Zoom and talk through and walk through this critical race theory stuff with a battlefield lawyer who's dealing with reparations, just testified in California for their reparations bill, to be able to do that in real time with other people sitting around having a conversation. I miss that. And then the other side of it, though, in terms of masks, is if there were no disease, I quite frankly like being able to put on a baseball cap, put on a black mask, have my hoodie, walk through the museum, and if I don't open my mouth, nobody knows it's me. So I mean, there's a whole nother dimension.
I'm looking in the chat. We got a lot of stuff. Oh, I love us. I love us. One more thing I want to shout out, Adjoa Samoa. Her handiwork today landed in passing of the Crown Act in the House.
Yes.
This is one leg of the whole thing that will allow for people to show up in spaces like however they want to be, and with their natural hair, their kingly, queenly crown, grabbing the sun.
Yes.
And not be fired and harassed on the job as a result of
we hope. You know, it's going to be a lot of litigation.
Yes.
You already know it's going to be a lot of litigation.
Also a lot of, you know, again, gaslighting. You know, I didn't fire you because of your hair. I fired you because of, you know, if they're smart. But these people aren't even trying to be, they don't even give a, I mean, it's weird to me that they are just like.
Is it weird?
It is that
is it weird, or is it white supremacy? We're gonna talk about Francis in a minute, but I mean, that's the problem. I mean, people gave Francis Cress Welsing hell, but now we see so much of what she was talking about for a half century being repackaged by people who are making a whole lot of money saying things that black people have been saying for a long time. I don't know that it's weird. In fact, well, first of all, you're right. Let's congratulate Adjoa, that whole team, all those sisters and brothers, particularly sisters, who've got this legislation passed at the state level, local ordinances, and now the federal legislature. But here's my question to you, Professor Hunter. Does this sail through the Senate? I don't know. I mean, I have no way. I'm hoping it'll just be a, you know, but I mean, there's at least one member in the White Nationalist Party who has hair that should be protected under this act. So
what's the problem with it? Like what can the opposition, how do you explain your opposition to this? This is because you have to explain why you don't want this legislation, which is discrimination. I mean, if I'm a journalist, I'm going to ask you, Manchin or Sinema, who are Democrats, or
they'll vote for it. This is low
Graham, or you know, I'm gonna ask you what is your opposition to it, Lindsey Graham? What is your opposition to it, Kennedy? Scott, yeah.
Well, I think in a case like this, where you don't want to be called a racist.
Yeah, this is an obvious one, right?
Well, I mean, the Emmett Till legislation was obvious too, and what
their argument was, this is already protected. This is already, we don't need an extra law. This is an extra law. So they did it on a technicality, those that were.
And it was overbroad. This was that little racist out of Kentucky, junior senator, white nationalist out of Kentucky's argument, which is why he held up the damn bill by itself. Their argument is that it had the potential to capture in the language as it was originally drafted people whose behavior shouldn't be covered. In other words, Justice Brennan used to say when he was in dissent, particularly the death penalty lines of cases, Furman versus Georgia and those McCleskey versus Kemp, he said, what y'all afraid of? Too much justice. That's what y'all afraid of. In other words, we got to put a limit on justice. It's, you know, so when you lynch somebody, the technical definition of lynching does not require death. In other words, if you come with your people and surround somebody and arrest their movement and take them somewhere, you could potentially be charged with lynching. That's lynch law. I mean, that's why Ida Wells wrote that book, Lynch Law in All Its Phases. In other words, when the minute they come up to you and say, Hunter, where you going? And surround you and say, no, you ain't going over there. You ain't going in the subway. Bring your ass over here. Come on. You could charge them with lynching. I mean, they ain't got to put a rope around your neck. So, of course, the junior senator from Kentucky he's scared of that. Why? Well, because a lot of his homies going to get caught up in that. Cats in a pizza parlor that blocked the passage so the sister can't get out with her slice. I mean, now, what? In other words, so is there a legitimate dimension to that? I don't know. Let's let the courts figure that out. But he held it up. So I think their argument on the Crown Act would be overreach. It'll be overreach. They'll say, well, this is just another example to make fun of that foghorn leghorn in Louisiana who don't talk like this, who was a Democrat. Shout out to Gary Chambers, who's running in the Democratic primary in Georgia. I mean, in Louisiana. I just love that brother for any number of reasons. If you've seen his commercials where he lights up the blunt, If you see his commercial where he burns the Confederate flag, I mean, have you interviewed him yet?
Yeah, did I put the video up yet?
Oh no, I must not have seen it.
No, I haven't. I haven't.
Oh, I gotta see. You probably had him on before this.
Yeah, no, Tanya and I talked to him.
Did you?
So I was saving it because he had a challenge to Lindsey Graham, to Jamie Harrison. So the next week I interviewed Jamie Harrison, played the clip.
Oh, I saw that. Oh, that's okay.
Right. So I'm gonna play Gary Chambers' interview, and then I'm gonna play the challenge, and then Jamie Harrison's. So I have that teed up, I think, for next Monday and Tuesday, or Sunday and Monday.
Oh,
so,
yeah, we gotta. I can't. I gotta
yeah,
see. Because the thing about people who don't know anything about Gary Chambers might think that performance is, and it's authentic, but you might think that's all there is.
Oh,
there's a sharp-minded work. Gary Chambers is a sharp-minded cat.
Louisiana can show up. Y'all better show up. Because
they can do it.
We have the numbers, and this was
yes.
The numbers are there in Louisiana. The numbers are there in Mississippi. The numbers are there, and definitely South Carolina. The numbers are there, getting there in North Carolina. We have a bunch of states that if we show up in the numbers that we actually are, 90% of us, 80% of us, those states are, we could just take them.
Yeah, and it wouldn't even have to be major. I mean, it's interesting. He was talking about Oscar Dunn, and encourage people to look up Oscar Dunn. In fact, there's a book that came out in the last 6 months on Oscar Dunn. It's kind of a graphic novel, which I thought was an interesting approach. But Dunn, PBS, Pinchback, all those Reconstruction era elected officials who were Republicans. And the white nationalists will seize on that and say, see, black people were Republicans. But the step they're missing, of course, is that Republican and Democrat are just tools. And so, Roland interviewed Chambers the other night, and that was a Thursday night, so I was on it. So, we were talking about him and to him and with him rather. And his approach is the approach we should take this at. There are two major political parties in this country. Joining them does not mean that you have to believe everything they believe. You're using them. Black people need to remember our history. In this country, we have used the major political parties to advance black interests. So when people say, well, we need our own party, those two things are not mutually exclusive. When you look at the history of black people, and again, when you look at what happened in Gary in 1972, and then in the years after Gary, the Voter Rights Act, 1965, and then by 1972, you start seeing black elected officials in greater numbers. They are at that meeting in Gary. Coleman Young, who's in the state senate in Michigan, becomes the mayor of Detroit. I mean, there are many others who are there. And one of the things Ron Walters used to always talk about, and not just Ron Walters, I think about Robert Smith, who's still around, Mac Jones, who's still around, who, son Bomani and daughter, what's her name? Tayari Jones, the novelist, the writer. People probably know his more famous children, but Mac Jones, these were the architects of black politics. Shelby Lewis, out of the South, out of Southern University, and all those folks who were down there, Jewel Presage, I'm thinking of the sisters who were all involved in this field of black politics. The argument is a black political party is where you gather people to come up with a report card. Here are the 10 things we want as we construct a we. Here are our agendas. And then you engage in two-party politics according to what your independent party has done. That's what the white boys did in creating what they call a white primary in places like Texas. And when you look at Nixon, the Nixon cases in Texas, when you look at all of those cases where black folk had to bust the white primary, it's because the Democratic Party was the electoral apparatus, but within the Democratic Party was the white supremacists who tried to privatize their action. And what the Supreme Court said is, you can't create a situation where the Democratic Party becomes a wholly owned subsidiary of your private political associations, because what you've done in effect is now endorse what you do privately through state action. See, that's the membrane through which white nationalism has been able to extend itself and to preserve itself. As long as they can put something into the field of private action, you see, they can keep it as private action. They have made the case, and the courts have allowed them to do this. Federal courts, they can make the case that they can do whatever the hell they want. Freedom of association. That's why after Brown versus Board of Education, you see the creation of all these black private schools. In fact, there's a little book called Overturning Brown. I wish I had it at hand. I would show it to you all, where you see all these academies in the South, all these private schools in the South, they come after 1954, because if it's a private school, you do what you want. And then, of course, there was the challenge from the federal government of now having to force some of these schools, at least the colleges, like Bob Jones University and others. You can't discriminate if you're getting federal financial aid, because that money comes from the federal government, comes from the people. Therefore, we now have a say in these discriminatory practices you have on campus. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The point is, and as it relates to Gary Chambers and what's going on in Louisiana and how we're thinking about this in terms of two-party politics, what we have to do, what we have done, what we have always done, is have political formations that are independent of the two parties that we then use to direct how we engage, using the two parties as avenues to exert pressure and to secure resources for ourselves. This is one of the pillars of the definition of Black politics. How do Black people secure resources for ourselves? So when you read the work of Mac Jones, when you read the work of Robert Smith, when you read the work of Jewel Presage or Shelby Lewis, when you read the work of the great Ron Walters, who Robert Smith in his book From the Bayou to the Bay, I wish I had it. Oh, yeah, here it is. This is Robert Smith's new biography. In fact, I just interviewed him. Autobiography of a Black Liberation Scholar. I've talked about this before. Robert Smith says, Jesse Jackson is the most important Black politician of the second half of the 20th century, and Ron Walters was the most important Black scholar activist of the second half of the 20th century. And people could debate that. I think it'd be an interesting debate to have and discussion, but what you can't do is dismiss that insight from somebody who was there the whole time. And I don't know that I would disagree with him. In fact, I'd be inclined to agree with him, because I'd be hard pressed to name somebody who was more important and influential. Some people might say Adam Clayton Powell, but again, I don't know. I think Jesse Jackson, Jesse Jackson and the formation that the Jackson campaigns of 84 and 88 represented, and equally important, the work that young Jesse was involved in as a junior lieutenant in that move from the 1960s forward that resulted in the Voting Rights Act of 65, among other things. Arguably, Jesse Jackson, not as an individual, but as a figure in the formation that emerged out of the 50s and 60s. Jesse Jackson, no Barack Obama, president of the United States. It's fairly clear. So when I hear, particularly, I'm not going to put this on young people. I'm going to put it on everybody. When I hear people say, well, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, they start roasting. I'm like, so clearly you don't know the history. And we're not talking about identity. We're not talking about personalities. We're not talking about what, all of us are human, which means we all got the possibility to get taken out with some personal revelation. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, looking at the larger political context, it's hard to make that argument. But anyway, Black politics, as Smith and others have defined it, Smith, Jones, Walters, Presage, Lewis, all that crew and their students, is really about how do you organize Black people to secure resources for Black communities. It's just that simple in terms of that grounding pillar. And in Ron Walters' case, who traveled the world, his book 1994-5, Pan-Africanism and the African Diaspora, Walters understands Black politics not just as a U.S. phenomena, but as a global phenomenon. So he looks at Latin America, he looks at Africa, he looks at Black politics in Europe, and you start seeing this. So anyway, I set out to say that where we are today, when you see a Jamie Harrison, you see a Gary Chambers, what you're looking at is the failure of the Black politics model. Mm-hmm. And you're looking at the failure that we could have predicted once Jim Crow, once U.S. legal apartheid was over, and the erosion of Black institutions led to the need to either revive those institutions, create new ones, drawing from those ones, or surrender to just becoming appendages of the social structure formations. This is Cedric Johnson, one of Ron Walters' students, and among others, when he wrote a book a few years ago called From Revolutionaries to Race Leaders. And the cover of the book is a picture of them at Gary, Amir Baraka, Jesse Jackson, all them on the cover. And the whole point is, when you come out of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, coming forward, you had the NAACP, you had the Prince Hall Masons, the Order of Eastern Stars, you had all the fraternities and sororities in terms of the Black kind of upper class. But in terms of the Masons and the Order of Eastern Star and all that crew, those are really also Black working class and Black poor, particularly in the South. And then when you add to that the network of Black people who are working in formations that are walled off by apartheid, the black teachers, the black doctors, the black lawyers, as few as they were. What you then have is a set of structures that can inform a black politics. So when you see someone like Diggs, Congressman Diggs, Charles Diggs out of Detroit, his family owned funeral homes. That's a whole black network. This is before finance capitalism and the neoliberal models of that have invaded even death. You know, they come in. I mean, when you read Carla Holloway's book Passed On about the history of death, as we talk about, you know, the funeral practices, that was a time when black people controlled all of that, from the churches to the funeral homes to the cemeteries. But now, of course, that has been invaded by white people. But, you know, Diggs is in a position to run for and win elective office and become a founding member of the Congressional Black Caucus, to be the black congressman who goes to Emmett Till's trial in Mississippi in the 1950s, who has a staffer, Randall Robinson, who creates Trans Africa to deal with these Pan-African questions. He's in a position to get into office because the people in Detroit know him because they've been burying their families. It's an institutional foundation for a black politics. It's very different than now, because what, you know, Johnson chronicles, what Walters talked about before he made transition, what you see is by the time you get to the 1980s and 90s, increasingly there's a new generation of black politicians who don't have those institutional ties. And by the time you get to where we are now, you've got black politicians who have no institutional ties to black people. Yeah, they may have been born in black communities. Yes, they know black people. Yes, they love black people. But there are no strong, independent black political formations. And now I'm not saying that those ones that were during apartheid either don't exist now, they do, or that they were completely progressive and Pan-Africanist and black power. No, they weren't. But apartheid was so bad that the things we were attacking, we could all agree on. This is Cedric Robinson's argument in his little book, Black Movements in America, where he says, you know, there are two divergent political traditions in the black United States. You've got the assimilationist tradition, which has always been here. Those first Negroes petitioning for rights in Virginia and other places who are working this stuff out, you know, who are the foregrounding of that black elite, who are modeling their notion of black liberation on proximity to what the white standard is of citizenship. And that's not to dismiss it at all. It's to say that they are in conversation with that because they're closest to it. And then he says, Robinson says, the vast majority of black people, this is the politics of the plantation, the fields. These Negroes have contempt for these oppressors. They see what it is. They understand oppression as the rejection of Africa in all its formations. They develop a politics that is communitarian, that is separatist in the sense that not hate white people, kill white people, but we're not with them. We don't want to be with them. We reject the culture. We reject the moral standards. We reject all of that. And so what you see is these two divergent political traditions always existed. But in moments when there was an agreement between a simple objective, sitting where you want on the bus, be able to apply for and get a job, be able to vote, they come together. And that's where you see progress. The Montgomery bus boycott doesn't work if it's just Dr. King and the petty bourgeois members of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. You got to have those women who are washing clothes in these white folks' house, these brothers who are out there toiling the fields, mowing the grass, planting the corn. And when you put them all together, because if you say stay off the bus in 1954 in Birmingham, that don't affect Martin and Coretta King. They taking Yolanda back and forth in their car. You got to get all them Negroes who ride the bus to stay off the bus. They're making the sacrifice. And so the civil rights movement, this is Kwame Ture's argument in Ready for Revolution. You know, the civil rights movement is made by the masses of the people, and that's everywhere. So anyway, I set out to say that these politicians today who need black votes, certainly in most of the districts, there are a few, like Ilhan Omar, for example, who is in a district which is majority white, you know, and keeps getting reelected and hopefully will keep getting reelected. But most of these black people are coming from black districts. And so they're going to get the black vote, but that black vote isn't as tied to black independent institutional formations. So when you look at a guy like Jamie Harrison out of South Carolina, his strategy is the Democratic Party strategy. Why? Because he's an employee of and a wholly made subsidiary of the Democratic Party. And so he ain't going to be able to say but so much. So when the cameras go off and he's sitting somewhere and everybody's sitting around and ain't nobody else around here listening, and you ask him a question, I suspect it to be a very different answer. It's a governance answer there. But once we're back in the meeting. Okay, y'all, we got to really think about what's best for everybody. And, what's good for Black people is good for everybody. You keep making appeals to people. And as Malcolm said, you're speaking a language they don't understand. Gary Chambers can count too. And he looking like, we don't need the Klansmen. I'm going to burn this Confederate flag and put out a commercial. Because guess what? You were never going to vote for me. Now, that thin slice of white people in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, that thin slice of white people in Shreveport, and some of them white people around there in Gretna and around them 3, 4 white, we cobble them together, and then all of us vote, we win. But what Black people have rejected is the person that comes in and says, well, yeah, but I'm going to keep chasing that white nationalist because I know if there's something I can say that will make, and Black people see them in a town forum, and here comes somebody without a mask on. Well, I understand what you're saying, Mr. SB, but quite frankly, I'm concerned with CRT. And then the answer is, well, I'm concerned too about intrusion of government in the classrooms, but this isn't really about that. What we have to understand is that enhanced education, quality education helps all our children. The Black people sitting there like, I ain't voting for this Negro because Gary Chambers comes in and says, why are you concerned about CRT? Do you even know what it is, Connie? You don't know. You shopping, Connie. Get out of here, Connie. In other words, I'm not going to pretend like you're going to vote for me. At that point, Black people said, well, shit, let me see. Is my registration? Oh, how many IDs do I need? I'm going to get 5 more than the ones you asked for. How many? In other words, we take it back to what we did in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. These new laws, some of them are worse than the ones in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And some of them aren't. But we won't be stopped by that if we have a reason to go. And that's independent Black politics. And that's what Mac Jones and them, that's what Robert Smith and them, that's what Ron Walters and them would look now and say, this is what we have lost because we have confused Democrat and Republican. Joe Manchin not a Democrat. He represents the energy party. We call it the lobby, but let's be clear. Kristen Sinema not a Democrat. She uses a D to vote, but she's in there with all the billionaires that fund her. The white nationalist party it's a shell. They got an R to be able to vote, but they put in by money. Finance, this is why I keep saying to people all the time, Shelby County versus Holder 2013 was a terrible decision with the Voting Rights Act, kicking out the teeth of Section 5, the pre-clearance section. Absolutely. But 3 years before that, John Roberts and them took a pickaxe to the thing that has probably upset things worse than Shelby County versus Holder in some ways, and that's Citizens United. Once you let these billionaires basically pay to brainwash people who ain't paying attention anyway, it's game over because most people don't even know what's going on. And it's not because people are stupid. It's because the society has flooded the zone all the time. So that moments like we've had over these last couple of years and what we're building now with Narrative and Nubia, those things get drowned out unless we make a deliberate choice to turn down the noise everywhere else. And the noise is everywhere else. And so I don't expect Jamie Harrison to be able to do anything. In fact, we shouldn't be asking Jamie Harrison to do anything. Jamie, bruh, you go into meetings, do what you got to do. We got the Chambers philosophy and the two divergent political positions. In other words, we organize, we decide what's best for us in these local elections, these state elections, these federal elections, and then we go out and people say, well, I ain't no Democrat. Hey, we're using the D like they use the D. Do you understand? You use the R the way they use the R. Do you really think that if all the Black people in the country joined the Republican Party, you really think the Republican Party would be happy? Not if you start sending people who say, I'm a staunch advocate of the Second Amendment. I think every Black person should have a gun. Wait, whoa, no, Chief. And in fact, I don't want to pay no more damn taxes. In fact, I want to have my own schools. I don't want you teaching nothing about no white people anywhere in my school. Right? We're together on this, right? Yeah, we're together. We're not together. How does this play?
I mean, I started Party Link in 2015 with that philosophy.
I remember.
And got eviscerated by my own people who couldn't get the strategy. We have to get out of our emotions. These are all transactions and we got a goal. Like, it ain't personal. I don't know these people.
It's not personal.
But I know I love us. And if it means that if I'm in a district that is Republican, all of us need to register, primary some mother freaker, put up a great Carr-like candidate or Gary Chambers-like candidate with an R next to their name and vote for them.
Wouldn't that be something?
Not rocket science.
It's
Damn,
it's not rocket science. It's tactical, right? And this is where the question of independent Black politics becomes important. And again, this is not. And here we have to, like you said, we have to be very careful here. This isn't an endorsement of the two-party, either party, Democratic Party or the Republican. It is a recognition of the real politic of a two-party system right now. Right now, 2022, it probably makes the most sense to use the D, because the R has given itself over to the party politics of white nationalism. That's where it is. And for the foreseeable future, that's where it's going to be. If the R had been habitable, you could make the argument that the last time the R was habitable on a national level was probably maybe the 1970s. Because certainly when you read Jackie Robinson's, there's a collection of his letters, First Class Citizenship, I think is the name of it, if I could find it on the shelves, and I know I wouldn't be able to, but you can look it up. It's a collection of Jackie Robinson's correspondence. And Robinson was a Republican. But it's not, that doesn't mean the R doesn't mean the same thing now as it did in the 1950s and 60s. And he was very critical, when you read his correspondence, of those federal politicians who he felt used him. Footnote: when you ever go to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, make sure when you go up into the sports gala, when you go through there, make sure you go all the way to the left in the back. There's a little, maybe 30-seat stadium auditorium, stadium style seats, old school baseball stadium seats, and they have a screen, they're projecting something. But on the far end of the wall, there's this beautiful blown up photograph, like a mural now photograph of the great Bob Gibson, who we talked about out of Omaha, Nebraska, having unleashed one of his high heat fastballs. And whenever I go over there, I sat in there for a long time on yesterday afternoon, just to sit there and to be in that space. But anyway, Jackie Ryan, man, Robinson's in the video. There's a statue of Robinson sliding in the home plate with Yogi Berra too late to tag him out. They got a Robinson jersey over there. They got Robinson. I'm like, man, for this to be representative of Black people since we were brought into this damn settler colony, if you went by percentages, Robinson is overrepresented, but there's a reason. And I think it's the 15th of April. The museum is going to mark Jack Robinson's entry into white Major League Baseball, and they're having a program. And they asked me a couple of weeks ago if I would be a panelist, and I told them, of course, I'm honored anytime they ask me at the National Museum of African American History and Culture to do something. But this one in particular, it has special meaning for me because, Jack Robinson is such a complicated figure. And when you read his correspondence, you see that while he was a member of the Republican Party, this was at a time when the Republican Party is very different than it is now. And Robinson, what he was from birth to transition, was a Black man. He was always clear about that. Missteps notwithstanding. There's the Paul Robeson stuff, the House Un-American Activity stuff. There's, all kind of things. But he was always for us. And so we started talking about Black independent politics. If there's a district where they have gerrymandered to the point where it's clear that nobody is going to win but a white nationalist, find somebody Black. And it might be a Black nationalist. Run them in the campaign. Blow up the party from within. And typically what you would find is, given the white nationalist values of the white nationalist party, a Black nationalist might find a home in a white nationalist party in a district like that. It might make more sense. But what you don't do is surrender the field of electoral politics to these white nationalists. They are very clear. And again, taking that working definition of Black politics from the Black politics founders, how do you secure resources for Black communities? And at the national level, I think it probably looks more like the Democratic Party at this juncture. But of course, Jamie Harrison is not going to sound like Gary Chambers, because Jamie Harrison is part of the Democratic Party, not part of independent Black politics using the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party are soft white nationalists. They're all white nationalists, the Democrats and the Republicans, in terms of party formation, because they're part of the U.S. political formation, which is why today, a couple of days after the birthday of Frances Cress Welsing, when we were talking before we came on, we thought we might evoke her, among other things. But But before we do, though, Professor Hunter, remember this was a couple of weeks ago. Somebody tagged you in a social media question about a fire in Arkansas in 1959. Do you remember that?
No.
They were asking, well, it's not something that most of us know about. There was a fire, and I wrote them back too. And so, yeah, I know about that. And I had the book to talk about it, but we ran out of time. This is the book.
Was this Wrightsville?
Yes.
Wrightsville. Yes.
Yes. Remember Wrights? That's exactly right. Yeah, you remember.
Yes, I do remember.
Yes, this is the book. Griff Stockley's book, Black Boys Burning. The 1959 fire at the Arkansas Negro Boys Industrial School. There was a fire March the 5th, 1959 at the Arkansas Negro Boys Industrial School, a fire trap building. Terribly constructed, old wiring, basically a death trap. If anything ever caught on fire there, 48 boys got away in the fire that happened in the middle of the night. A judge for juveniles, judges would find these boys guilty. They were ranging from 13 to 17 years old. And it was run by Black people. The governor at the time was Orville Faubus. Y'all heard that name, Faubus. Faubus is famous in the country at this point, if you know him at all, for the social structure. He was the governor of Arkansas when those young people from Horace Mann, Paul Laurence Dunbar high schools in Little Rock, Arkansas, forced their way under the tutelage and leadership of Black teachers and the NAACP local chapter, statewide chapter led by Daisy Bates, which we talked about early on in class, into Central High School. And Faubus was the governor. Remind me of the great Charles Mingus, Fables of Faubus. Some of y'all heard that song where he made a whole song roasting Faubus. Let's go. Dun, dun, dun. He's talking to one of the musicians in the band, and you hear him say the kind of melody of song is dun 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 dun. You know, Mingus was a bass player. You hear the horn, and then they start singing, and you hear Mingus say, "Name me someone sick and ridiculous," and then when Governor Faubus, why is he so sick and ridiculous? 2, 4, 6, 8. He tells lies and teach you hate. And then it's like an 8-minute, and he's like, "Tell me someone sick and ridiculous, Danny." And he says, "Faubus, Rockefeller, Eisenhower." And they start naming everybody. Why are they so sick and ridiculous? It's like, oh, he won't let us in his school. Then Mingus says, "Then he's a fool." And you hear, "Oh, fool." And then they go back and Fables of Faubus is one of the great jazz performances of all time. And of course, Faubus is the one that Louis Armstrong lights up. Because remember, Armstrong was considered at that time kind of a go-along Negro because he didn't say a whole lot public, but that is a complete misreading of Louis Armstrong. But Armstrong, at the same time, the State Department started sending jazz musicians, I won't say jazz musicians, sending our musicians around the world, fighting the Cold War with Russia, like, oh, we're here and we have democracy, blah. So Dizzy Gillespie going through Latin America. Duke Ellington, one of my favorite songs is Duke Ellington with his Latin American suite, where he comes in at the beginning and you just hear Ellington on the piano. It's a beautiful thing. Bling, doom, 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 doom. Almost like a little Latin American beat. Doom, 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 doom. Duke comes in. Doom, 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 doom. So he states the melody at first, and then he carries it on for like about 8 or 9 minutes. Everybody comes in, the orchestra comes in, everybody's got their solos that comes in, and then near the very end, you hear in the background, you just hear him as it swells to this crescendo, and you got this, everybody's playing. It's a beautiful, this Latin American beat, and then they're very quietly, you hear blue, 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 blue. Because what it reveals is the whole song is just Ellington stating that simple melody and then getting out of the way of his players. It's a beautiful thing. But Ellington, they're going through Latin America. They're going through Europe. They even go to Africa. There's a film that was not available for years. They used to show it at the Louis Armstrong House in Queens. And oh, by the way, when we were in the hotel at Hershey, I found a copy of a magazine from, let me see here. They had copies of this magazine, Preservation. This is the magazine of the National Trust for Historical Preservation. And the cover article of this month's article is Finding Lewis Latimer. Did you see it? So I was like, man, the Lewis Latimer House is open for business. And it's in Queens as well. Lewis Latimer, the great inventor.
I got to interview his daughter before she.
Are you serious?
Yeah, she lived in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, and I did a 3-month thing for the Daily News and got to sit with her. She was also brilliant. Also,
yes.
Yeah, she lived.
Oh my God. I can't tell you how happy that makes me. Because that Latimer family.
Yes. You know, though, I'm so sad that the opportunities when you're in these institutions like, you know, Daily News, New York Times, what have you, as journalists, you get to have these conversations. You have access to people. But I'm in my 20s, you know, without the institutional knowledge, without the knowledge of self. And I think I asked great questions, and I think I did wonderful pieces, but I mean, I did a whole graveside tour of all the Black people, went to Armstrong's grave and Malcolm and all of the people, you know, and did this beautiful, you know, piece on where Black people were buried in New York City. But to know what I know now with this governance structured understanding of us, and then these people aren't here anymore. Like I got to interview Frances Cress Welsing, who we're going to talk with. Her birthday was yesterday. Without, you know, my dad had me read the ISIS papers.
Oh.
Thank you, though, Dr. Carr. You know, I don't have the same mind, you know, like going through where we are, where do we go from here? Community and chaos. Reading that now, it just.
Well, none of us do. None of us do. I think we all have that feeling. The more we study, the more we hear, the more we experience, the more we learn, the more we wish we could go back to our younger selves. Because the people we met, but the fact that you sat with her is the thing. It's the thing itself. Because that is what Tata Fukuyao out of Congo used to call Lufuki. Robert Farris Thompson speculates that who Fukuyao taught, basically, in terms of his Congo knowledge, he speculates that that's one of the roots of the word funky, Lufuki, which means to convey the essence of a human to another human. So when you sit with an elder, you are receiving their Lufuki. You're receiving their essence. So even if you would, of course, ask different questions, you sat with her, which means her energy and your energy commingled. So it's okay. You know what I'm saying? That's the DNA of Lewis Latimer right there.
Queen Mother Moore, you know, but you know, I remember knowing that she was somebody, you know, obviously, because that's why I wanted to sit and talk with her, knowing that she was somebody, but not really knowing all that this woman brought to, you know, it's just, but go ahead, say less. Let me see the preservation thing. And then we're going to do a different little feature today. Cause you know, every now and then the doorbell rings while we're doing in class.
That's true. It may ring today, but it won't.
And there's a delivery. So I was like, why don't we do like, you know, what did Dr. Carr get in the mail this week?
Yeah, you know, I saved this piece I've been waiting on. In fact, we're going to do that for sure. No question. It's called Burning Bright. This is they moved his house. It's in Queens. This is an article by Melanie Rock. These are Lewis Latimer's tools. Here's his house. They had to move it several blocks because, of course, the gentrifiers came in and wanted to, quote unquote, develop the neighborhood. So they moved it up from where he is. There he is right there. His father came out of enslavement. So her grandmother, his daughter, and the obituary that ran in the New York Times Tuesday, December 13th, 1928, described Lewis Latimer as, quote, an electrical engineer widely known in the United States, end quote. Yet his name and his contributions have been grossly overlooked for the past 100 years. Buried beside his wife, Mary, in Fall River, Massachusetts, Latimer has an unmarked grave. Not Latimer had an unmarked grave. Latimer has an unmarked grave. Now, that's not, is it Fernwood? I think that's where everybody's buried up there. Shout out to James Smallin, who goes to Malcolm and Betty's graves every May to the ritual. That's where Louis Armstrong, right? And everybody else is. Everybody is in that.
Miles Davis. I mean, they have beautiful tombstones too.
Paul and Essie Robeson, no question. It's like that's where the place you go. I mean, that's a governance structure. That is a place that I'm thinking about my friend Tammy Gibson. I'm looking over her book, Honoring the Legacy, that she's visited many times. But here's the thing, as we know about Latimer, whose father escaped enslavement from Virginia with his wife, Rebecca, who was then recaptured in Boston and imprisoned and became like this icon of the anti-enslavement movement because his wife was not captured. And once George got free, they settled in Massachusetts, and Lewis was born in 1848. Latimer enlisted in the Union Navy. He was a Navy veteran. He served on the USS Massasoit until the end of the Civil War. Got married in 1873. His wife, Mary Wilson Lewis. He became a head draftsman. He learned drafting, and he was so good, head drafters around the country and inventors started employing him for drafting skills. And he started patenting stuff. He co-patented an improved bathroom for railroad cars in 1874 with a white dude. And then he hooked up with Edison because Edison was like, they tell me Latimer is the man. Latimer published a book in 1890 called Incandescent Electrical Lighting, a practical description of the Edison system, which was considered the premier manual of its kind. Now, what does that mean? Latimer, in fact, let me just read what she wrote. Latimer's materials for his own patents, including the carbon filament advances and a precursor to the modern air conditioning unit, is one dude, displayed the depth of his artistry. Electrical lighting competitors, Hiram Maxim and Thomas Edison, each hired him to help develop their inventions, but the light bulb didn't stay on. Lewis Latimer invented the carbon filament that extended the life of the light bulb, so much so, as I read now, it says, Lewis Latimer worked for a myriad electrical companies, great and small, moving his young family from Boston to Bridgeport, Connecticut, to London, and then to Brooklyn and Queens, New York. Now, what it doesn't say is the reason they were in London is because London didn't send for Edison, they sent for Latimer. Latimer wouldn't let the light stay on. Oh, we got a light bulb. Yeah, it should keep burning out. Latimer's like, oh, I got something for that. What, you do that? Oh, it's staying on. Yeah. So why we know the name Thomas Alva Edison, but don't know the name Lewis Latimer? Well, many of us do. We're in the governance structure. But anyway, I went through all that to say that they have revitalized this little museum. It's a home museum. The Lewis Latimer Museum is now in his house. So they got they got exhibits, they got bookstore, they got games. And the beautiful thing about it is they got things that young people do. You can become a young inventor. You can come and learn about technology. It's really something. So I would encourage people, if y'all in Queens, or if you're in the New York area, or if you're coming to New York, go to the Lewis Latimer Museum. Then the only reason I mentioned that it came to mind is because they turned Louis Armstrong's house, Louis and Louise Armstrong's house in Queens, into a museum. I've actually been there, and they would show Satchmo the Great, which was a film, I think 1957, Edward Murrow narrates it, where you see Armstrong sent on these State Department tours, but he's going to Africa. Man, Armstrong in Africa is such a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Of course, he performed at Kwame Nkrumah's, the events that led up to Kwame Nkrumah being inaugurated the first prime minister. You see him play Black and Blue. And oh man, when he lands in Congo, Armstrong is like, I saw somebody, because Armstrong liked to write letters. You can read his correspondence as well. Ricky Riccardi has a book called What a Wonderful World on the life of Louis Armstrong. Terry Treachout has a book called Lewis. I mean, there's a shelf of books on there. In fact, Thomas Brothers' book, Louis Armstrong's New Orleans, is a very interesting text. It's one of two that Brothers has written so far in this. But the best writing on Louis Armstrong is Louis Armstrong, because his letters have been published. I mean, Louis Armstrong was constantly writing. It's a guy who, if you think about him in the terms of social structure, narrating who an intellectual is, they would stop him at the reform school that he went to after they shot off a gun and they put a horn in his hand. Y'all don't know Louis Armstrong? Go read what Louis Armstrong wrote. When you go to the museum, his house, they preserved it. I love going to that little house, because you see how the Armstrongs lived their lives. They didn't have any biological children, but all the children in the neighborhood were their children, regardless of race. And so you just see how they were part of this working class neighborhood in Queens, around the corner, Monk's house, Dizzy Gillespie, Lewis Latimer, Lizzie Queen. I mean, so you see this network of human beings anchored by Black humanity. But anyway, I said to say this: Armstrong, getting on the plane, is asked about Faubus. And that day, to use this part as for young people, he had time. So Louis Armstrong is like, I think it's a shame. I think that Faubus is an uneducated plowboy, and if Eisenhower had any courage, he would take those kids by the hand and walk them into the school himself. Oh, and you can see as Armstrong is talking, you can see his wife. You see Louise keep looking around like, oh shit, what? Because see, this is governance structure, Louis Armstrong. You know, y'all used to, you know, hello, Dolly. This is what y'all used to, right? Y'all used to, you know, well, you know, good evening, everybody. You know, yeah, y'all used to Louis Armstrong. Y'all love him so much because you think he about that handkerchief. But as Ozzie Davis said, when he put that horn to his lips, he could kill a period. He'd kill you with that horn. But that day, he had time. Y'all asked about the wrong thing. I mean, you know, and after a while, you get tired of seeing black school children used, as Du Bois says, we talked about a few months ago, as cannon fodder to bust up in the white school. Well, you see Ruby Bridges, who is still alive this day. You see her as a little girl coming down them damn steps in Louisiana with her briefcase and surrounded by these federal marshals. You know, white girl. I want to see some white girls with their briefcases walking down because a sniper might shoot them in the back of the head. You know, let's just call this what it is. One of the reasons I loved and will always love Frances Cress Welsing, because she wasn't scared. There's too many punk ass people around here calling themselves Negro intellectuals. Frances Cress Welsing was not a punk. Do you understand? She was not a punk. She was third generation medical doctor in her family. You understand? Her grandfather was an MD. Her father was an MD. She and her two sisters. And she was a psychiatrist by training. So, you know, she wasn't no punk, though. You know what I'm saying? So when you got a child fighting your battles, that's a hell of a thing. Louis Armstrong had time that day. And so I set out to say that he's talking about this situation going on in Arkansas with this crazy man, Faubus, this addle-brained racist. And in this book that somebody asked us about a couple of weeks ago that we're finally getting to, just mentioning Black Boys Burning, what Griff Stockley talks about is that on that morning of March 5th, early morning, March 5th, 1959, 2 years after Little Rock, 48 boys escaped a fire in the middle of the night in a fire hazard rat trap called the Negro Boys Industrial School in Wrightsville. 48 boys escaped, 21 didn't. 21 black boys between the age of 13 to 17 burned to death. And it is not something that is known. We talk about the Little Rock Nine. Oh, this Arkansas too. This right up the street. Why don't y'all talk about the Nick? Because it ain't. In fact, there was a group that was formed that is still seeking justice because they never figured out the cause. Nobody was ever punished. And they created something in 2009, the 50th anniversary of the fire. 2009 is the 50th anniversary. This is not ancient history. They created something called the ASH Foundation. It's an acronym for Arkansas's Secret Holocaust. Mm. I mean, you burn up these black boys. And then Faubus tried to put it off on the black people that ran the place, the superintendent who had come from Hampton University. The superintendent, you know, shout out to Hampton University for offering free room and board and tuition to students from the Ukraine. That's a beautiful thing. Thank you, President Harvey, and those at Hampton University for doing that for these folks who are fleeing war and violence in the Ukraine. I hope that you will do the same for all these black people fleeing assault in the United States of America, who are currently a student body. But at any rate, don't worry, I got a little smoke for the other HU as well. And we're not gonna have a battle of the real HU. There's room enough for both in this moment. I'll keep you in suspense. But yeah, Arkansas Secret Holocaust. And so, you know, the question then becomes, and there's a woman, Peggy Duncan, I'll read from the book, a white woman, then a resident of North Little Rock, is listed as chief financial officer of ASH. She explained her involvement with the group in an interview 3 years later. I'm ashamed of what happened. I was raised by a very, very dear black woman. I think Johnny would turn over in her grave if she knew I didn't do anything. My mother was not well and she worked for my family, spanked my butt when it needed to be spanked, patted me on the head when I needed to be patted on the head. She said she had joined ASH after reading a cover story about the fire in the Arkansas Times. So she goes on, and I'm saying this ain't just black people, and some of these white people came from the Jim Crow era. This woman's finally remembering the black woman who raised her, like the millions who will never acknowledge that. But she wanted to join and do something. But I want to transition, and y'all can, you know, get this book right here. Every page will make you mad as hell. how those boys ended up there, the judicial system that sent them there, everything. But we can use this as a pathway to Francis Cress Welsing. This is the beginning, the fire this time. And, I think about it because, of course, outside the National Museum of African American History and Culture, there is a quote from James Baldwin, the essence of which says, until we confront the past truthfully, we will never make progress. And every time I pass that quote on my way to get my little ticket scanned and walk in, I just laugh, because that ain't never going to happen. The fire this time. So in other words, it's doomed, because they ain't never going to tell the truth. We ain't never going to tell the truth. It's too hard. So let's just keep, concentrating on them bracketed black bodies. March Madness. Isn't it mad? In an editorial on March 20th, 1959, I'm reading from this, L.C. Bates, the African-American publisher of the Arkansas State Press, wrote the following, quote, we wonder if the white man in the South, who has set the pattern for the Negro to live by, can find any consolation for the irreparable damage his system has caused, end quote. 15 days prior, an early morning fire had burned to death 21 African-American adolescents who were locked inside a dormitory at the Arkansas Negro Boys School outside of Little Rock. No employee was present to unlock the door. By the way, that's what Faubus tried to hang it on. Said the superintendent's supposed to have somebody there. The superintendent had divided duties between two black men who were supposed to come check on the boys at night. One of them didn't show up. The other one didn't know the other one didn't show up, so he didn't show up. And so it was a tangle of incompetence. It was a tangle of missed pings. There was some confusion about testimony. They immediately launched an investigation, but make no mistake about it, this wasn't on those black people. That rat trap should have been closed. Faubus had visited it the year before and said this is an abomination and hadn't put a penny of the Arkansas state legislature or city or public funds to improving it. You went here, talked some smack, got in the press conference and left. Fables of Faubus. Name me someone sick and ridiculous. Governor Faubus. Anyway, on March 9th, back to the book, 9 black school children in Georgia had drowned when a bus transporting them to a segregated school overturned. How many people heard about that? As L.C. and his wife, Daisy Bates, knew only too well, white supremacy had been carried out by, and here's the litany that leads us to Francis Cress Welsing. White supremacy had been carried out by slavery, bad science, murder, rape, terrorism, lynching, massacres, mass incarceration, peonage, disenfranchisement, racial cleansing, arson, racial covenants, predatory lending, loan discrimination, redlining, blockbusting, segregation, intimidation, humiliation, discrimination, denial of free speech, termination from employment, a truly massive theft of financial resources for services lawfully intended for black citizens, quarantine rather than effective treatment of black persons diagnosed with tuberculosis, paternalism, and a civil and criminal justice system that routinely denied African Americans due process and equal protection of the law. How do you explain this system we live under? First of all, can it be explained coherently with a theory, with one theory? Or is it just accidents of humanity? Is it just human nature? When they say why? Tell them that it's human nature. Nah, Mike, that's a nice song, but we want a little bit more of explanatory framework, bro. So when you think about what we've endured, these black boys burn up. Then a few days later, 9 black boys got killed because the bus turned over and they were going to say, what? Okay. And then people say, well, it's just human nature. I mean, black people killing black people. What's this? The autopsy came out with the rapper Young Dolph out of Memphis, the homie, got shot with 21 times, got hit with 21, but and then whose girlfriend who's got killed day before yesterday or something over a bowling ball or yesterday. Did you see that? Somebody will know in Nubia if y'all put it in there. Somebody put it in there. Got shot and killed over a bowling ball. Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
We sitting on 1,000 over here right now. Those of you who will watch this later on YouTube understand that, we're building something. And by the way, I take this
baby mama, Lakevia Jackson. Is that?
Yeah. Is that her name? NHI. Yes. They've never stopped killing us. Yes.
Mother of Young Thug.
Young Thug and this sister Jackson have a baby together.
Yes.
So she shot and killed over a bowling ball. I just saw the headline. But the response will be, see, all black people killing each other. Well, as Amos Wilson out of Hattiesburg, Mississippi would say, black on black violence in service of white domination. It's a system, a field of violence. You think that black people just showed up on the planet like that? And of course, the racists will say, well, yes, I can't. Well, I used to not be able to say that out loud, but since Donald Trump, I can say it out loud. You people are not human. What does it mean to be human? Sylvia Winter would probably stop me at this point, and all of us, and say, will you stop arguing over the definition of humanity? Don't you know human means white? In order to dismantle white nationalism, you got to dismantle the concept of the human as it comes from the West, because they was doing this to each other before they came and did it to you. And in fact, they created a they by saying they were not you. This, of course, is James Baldwin, who would say, you know, it must be terrible to be of a group of people whose main thing that holds them together is that they are not, thank heaven, you. In other words, the concept of whiteness requires blackness. As I look over here and see this other book on Louis Armstrong, I'm not going to spend the day listening to Louis Armstrong. Anyway, the whole point is that because Armstrong performs for Kwame Nkrumah in 1957 with the British royalty sitting in the room, and Nkrumah sitting there in his Western dress. He ain't got on the clothes he came out of prison with, where he gave that fiery speech in Accra that night that he came out, galvanizing everybody. He ain't got the kente on that he wears to Nkrumah, to Du Bois's house and Du Bois's funeral. He got on the Western clothes, and Armstrong stand up there in Western clothes, and he sings Andy Razaf, that Madagascar brother, the lyrics to his song, you know, old empty bed, springs hard as lead, feet like old Ned, wished I was dead. All my life through, I've been so black and blue. Even the mouse ran from my house. They laugh at you and scorned you too. What did I do to be so black and blue? I'm white inside, but that don't help my case, 'cause I can't hide what is in my face. How will it end? Ain't got a friend. My only sin is in my skin. What did I do to be so black and blue? And you see in Nkrumah the little edge of his rim of his eyes with the tears watering up. And Nkrumah is an African. He's Ghanaian. He ain't even from a large formation. His nation, what some people will call a tribe, is a smaller group among the tree speakers. I had to make sure I pronounced that correctly. My dear friend and Baba, Jeremiah Wright, we were on a conversation with him last week, a couple of days ago on the Zoom, and he was saying, you keep rolling that R. There's no R in there. You got almost said a ch in there. So, okay, Baba, that's right. I gotta correct this. And now all my Ghanaian friends, why don't y'all correct me, y'all tree speakers? So at any rate, by the way, Jeremiah Wright, who wrote the chapter on religion in a book that was published a couple of years ago called The Osiris Papers, which is the companion to the ISIS Papers, co-edited by my friend Ray Winbush, who is at Morgan State University, who's very good friends with Francis Cress Welsing, and published, of course, by the great William Paul Coates, Black Classic Press. Jeremiah Wright wrote the section on religion. Conrad Worrell wrote the section on politics, the chapter on politics. Ray, of course, with the introduction. Chuck D wrote the chapter on religion, because, of course, we remember that Public Enemy's album Fear of a Black Planet was taken, the title was taken from, and you hear the voice of Francis Cress Welsing on that album. Those of you who are hip-hop heads remember that. Fear of a Black Planet, of course, the title was taken from Francis Cress Welsing's work of White Fear of Genetic Annihilation and the Fears of Black Planet. And you hear her voice in transitions, like there's one place in there where they're transitioning to the song Polly Want a Cracker on Chuck D's and Public Enemy's Fear of a Black Planet, and you hear her say, white man, black woman, black baby. Black man, white woman, black baby. In other words, the fear of genetic annihilation. This is Francis Cress Welsing's theory, which leads me to the question. can you create a theory of how things like what we saw happen in Arkansas, what we've seen over and over every day, that litany of abuses that we have suffered from since before enslavement started in some ways, the litany of abuses that these various people who come clustered eventually under the concept of whiteness vent on themselves. People say, well, people did that. People did bad things to people since the beginning of time, all human beings. You're absolutely right. Let's stipulate bad things happen everywhere around the world. And then I was watching something the other day, I don't know, it was John Stewart, somebody, and they asked people a question, and of course they edited the responses. And I don't know who gave a better response, but they claim nobody gave a better response. And they said, can you name a time in history where white people did something that didn't involve violence, or didn't involve, can you, what was the question? Can you name a time in history when white people were actually the best in the world at something? And then you see these various people, most of them not black. And if you stop to think about it, the litany of abuses, you know, you can name the Renaissance, you can name the Enlightenment, but in order to do that, you got to basically say, well, during the Renaissance is when the period when, you know, you see the perfection of art and music and science. And what you doing? Well, I'm looking at this little corner of Western Eurasia. But, well, can you expand your scope? What's going on around the world? I don't know. I have to look in this tunnel to be able to see. Well, why don't you just do this? Oh, is that what y'all call China? Well, look at all these 100 million people over here across the Atlantic Ocean. Is it? What's that? Oh, damn, that's Africa. What? Oh, y'all doing it first? Oh, Da Vinci. I'm sorry, bro. Like, can I amend my answer? Right? Because in order to say that stuff about Europe, you gotta look like this. You know what I'm saying? Because if you do this, you start seeing the roots of a lot that ends up there. Here we all. What's it? The 19th. We're 2 days before the equinox. Right? I mean, even the rituals of Europe. We just passed St. Patrick's Day, which is basically how the Roman Christianity colonized Ireland and let them put some of their rituals in. Because, you know, European Christianity is basically a hodgepodge of European ways of knowing that get pulled into Christianity, because you can't take everything from people. You got to let them have some sort of people around here pinching each other and all this old crazy shit. Well, yeah, they got their own festivals. They got the Celtic people got their own thing. Like, you got to bring all that stuff in. And of course, we have Easter where it is in the calendar because of the equinox. And after the 21st, the days have been getting longer. And then on shout out to the United States Senate for passing unanimously getting rid of daylight savings times. You can't pass nothing to help black people from getting tortured, but you can pass daylight savings time, right? But anyways, the days get longer, you celebrate that. Well, metaphorically, which is what Frances Cress Welsing is dealing with largely in her social theory, which I'm getting to this question of can you have a unified theory? The symbols of Easter, because you let them pagan people keep their rabbits too. And their feasts of the Lupercal. The Romans had to keep all that. So that's why you got, you know, Easter egg hunts on the same lawns that you're going to come in that same building 24 hours from now and talk about a cat coming up out of grave. So, I mean, all that stuff gets mashed up together because you can't take people's ways of knowing from them as you're trying to colonize them without engendering resistance. Well, all of that symbolism, all of those movement and memory moments, cultural meaning making moments, to use our Africana studies lens and remind people that we created those sets of categories as a grounding for a discipline that doesn't claim to or attempt to do what Frances Cress Welsing was attempting to do, which is create a unified theory. See, this is where I think I might depart from Dr. Welsing, from Mama Frances. I think I would depart with her on the search for a unified theory in terms of human behavior. This is why, as we created the Africana Studies framework, we created a framework with a methodology that does two things. Number one, it creates a how to study Africana, which is why if you're not talking about how to study Africana, you're not doing Africana studies. Well, I'm studying Black people. Okay, that's the study of Black people. It's not Black studies. It's not Africana. It's not generating methodology and normative theory, to quote Lucius Outlaw, my friend Lucius Outlaw. So that's the first thing it does. But the other thing it does is within those categories, it has the flexibility for opposing viewpoints, for arguments, for consensus building that doesn't leave anyone out. So we start talking about, for example, the governance structure. Who are Africans to each other? One of the areas, I think probably the most critical area for Frances Cress Welsing in terms of those who have been who critically engaged her work. And if you haven't read Frances Cress Welsing or heard Frances Cress Welsing, then I would then say that you should probably do that before you say something about her. Don't listen to what other people say before listening to her herself. But one of the critical areas is around gender. In fact, in the ISIS papers, we know that, which is a compilation of her writings over the years, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a minute. She has a chapter in here on the crises in Black male-female relationships. Is it a false problem? A chapter, Black women moving toward the 21st century. But the one that probably has gained the most attention is chapter 6, the politics behind Black male passivity, effeminization, bisexuality, and homosexuality. And, you know, Frances Cress Welsing, very interestingly, and let me say this parenthetically, and I want to ask you, Professor Hunter, to kind of help us as we get into this thing for a few minutes on Frances Cress Welsing, to share with us your experience with her. As I knew her over the years and watched her, and once a month at Howard, she had a class that she convened on Thursday nights. And a lot of times I would be over there in Blackburn, so I would, you know, stand there and watch. She taught for years. I never heard her have a crossword for another human being. I never heard her engaged in anti-white rhetoric. She's a very loving human being. Her sister Lauren, Lauren Kress, one of the founders of WPFW, one of the early voices of WPFW here in Washington, D.C., very similarly. And what she writes, this is from August 1974, this chapter, The Politics Behind Black Male Passivity, Effeminization, Bisexuality, and Homosexuality. She says, Black male passivity, effeminization, bisexuality, and homosexuality are being encountered increasingly by Black psychiatrists. And mind you, she was a child psychiatrist primarily. She was not renewed at Howard University in 1975. She had reached the 7 years of her tenure track appointment, College of Medicine, and she was let go. The same semester as Hakeem Abudi was let go. The Institute of Arts and Humanities, John Oliver Killens, the writer, was let go by Howard University. They, unlike Frances Cress Welsing, were not tenure track faculty. They were non-tenure track faculty. Some of you all may have heard, this is where the smoke for HU, the other HU, comes in, that the non-tenure track faculty have proposed going on strike at the back end of next week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, because they have not been able to negotiate a contract with the university after several years. What they're asking for, I think, is eminently reasonable. I signed a letter of support from the tenure and tenure track faculty, along with a number of other people. If you saw that letter at all, it's out there on social media. Probably the most prominent name on there is Nicole Hannah-Jones, who also signed that letter, along with a number of other faculty. I'm sure that the administration doesn't like any of us signing it, but you know, as Curtis Mayfield said, if there's hell below, we all going to go. So I'm not going to consign somebody else to go to hell. We'll all be there together, which brings to the principal point that they let Frances Cress Welsing go, and she was on tenure track at Howard. The students raised hell. They let Hakeem Abudi go and John Oliver Killens, and they, like these non-tenure track faculty now at Howard, were just renewed year to year. And they went on. And this is there's a long history, not just at Howard, but at HBCUs. And now, in the neoliberal university model that some of these HBCUs seem to be aspiring to, the move now is to have more contingent faculty, to have more people who are at the risk and the whim of administrators who are more and more not educators, who are looking at business models for education. In fact, I saw something, and I have to confirm this. Some of y'all can confirm it. I did look up UCLA's website, and the posting does seem to be confirmed there, but it was so absurd that it makes perfect sense and no sense at the same time. They listed an assistant professor of chemistry, assistant adjunct professor of chemistry, so it wouldn't be a tenure track position. And they said, this is a position for which we want a PhD, we want a significant record of teaching excellence, blah, 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 and for which there will be no compensation. No compensation. But if you think about it, Prof, who could apply for that job?
Oh, a wealthy person, independently wealthy person.
Exactly. An independently wealthy person, or at the complete opposite side of the spectrum, an incredibly desperate PhD in chemistry who can't get a job somewhere else, who's then going to have to subsidize her teaching by working a job or two or three or four, like many adjuncts do. and who would only take that job for the prestige of saying I was on the faculty at UCLA for a term or two. And so this is the model, though. This is the university model. Now I said all that, and I'm gonna set this aside with this. This too, not only, not even primarily, but this too. That's why we're building this. I said it this weekend, and I'm gonna say it again. And then one of the things Reverend Wright, when we logged on, one of the things Baba J said was, "Where's number 105?" Man, he accosted me. I said, "Baba, we was together in person last weekend. We'll be back."
Jeremiah Wright?
Yes.
Be Jeremiah Wright.
Yes, that's my man. That's what I'm saying.
He watches us?
Huh?
He watches us?
Yes. Oh, of course. Now, y'all, I know you're not surprised by the people who watch us all the time. Oh, no, he don't miss nothing. In fact, look, we got a whole nother conversation. And I asked him, man, Baba, you know, because he had the stroke. In fact, my God, Paul pulled together, and Natalie Stokes at Black Classic Press pulled together when they had a book launch for the Osiris Papers, the companion volume, which is people who knew Cress Welsing, writing about her in the areas of human activity that she outlines, following behind this brother right here, who is still around in his mid-90s, the great Neely Fuller Jr. This is the recent edition of his book, The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a compensatory counter-racist code. This is the 2016 version of something he wrote almost 50 years before this. But anyway, we'll get into that in a second. We have some time. But he wrote his chapter in the Osiris Papers on religion and Frances Cress Welsing. You know, Jeremiah Wright is an expansive mind. I mean, in the tradition of Howard Thurman and so many others. I mean, many of these people he knew, right? So, but he said, they gave me a deadline, and then they gave me another deadline that I missed that one. Then they gave me another deadline that I missed that one. And finally, he said the last deadline was September. And he said, I stayed in my office and all through the night writing. And when I finally finished it and sent it, then I had my stroke that very same day. So you hear Paul, oh no, he said, no. He says, your fault. But I mean, this is a man who had a major stroke, continues to preach, continues to talk. And I asked him, man, Bobby, you know, you be in public conversations. You still doing public conversations, right? He said, yes. So we're going to invite him in the Nubia one day because he will come. And then we can have a conversation with him. But anyway, but still not only his intellect, his passion, his spirit is stronger than ever. And I seen Jeremiah Wright, Pete Jeremiah Wright, sat with him. And one time we was at Russ College for this African-American student thing. We was up till the middle of the night, just sitting in the hotel lobby. We all sitting around Baba J. Holden Court. It was an incredible experience. He still does that. And his work is in many ways undiminished. In fact, this last he was singing. I think he's getting stronger because I'm like, Bobby, you sing. Because one of the things he always said was the stroke robbed him of, because you know Jeremiah Wright loved to sing and he could really sing. And unless you've seen Jeremiah Wright lead an entire auditorium of a couple of thousand people in song on one of them old school stylistic songs and then put it into the sermon, you haven't lived. But at any rate, so I said, oh man, but he was singing this last time. He was leading me through some hymns as he was giving comment on watching you know, our mom's ritual of transition. And I mean, that was just even a lesson in itself, listening to him there on. Thank you for that, Baba J. But anyway, he's undiminished. So anyway, he wrote the piece on religion in the tribute to Frances Cress Welsing, who he knew. And he's critical. He says, you know, Frances Cress Welsing critiques Christianity. He said, I would have loved to have had extended conversation with her, which I wish I could now have had with her around religion, not Christianity. He says in many ways her critique of Christianity is slamming, but what she's missing is the larger field of African spirituality and religion. And he starts talking about Asa Hilliard and his experiences. He starts talking about Bobby Wright, who was a friend of Frances Cress Welsing, colleague of his. People should look him up. He wrote a little piece called The Psychopathic Racial Personality. That's important. And in fact, chapter 5 in this book, The Symbolism of Christ, the Cross, Crucifix, Communion, and Christian Holidays, she takes on Christianity. And again, and we'll talk about this in terms of the basis of Frances Cress Welsing's theory. She's trying to create a grand theory to explain white supremacy, racism, white supremacy, as she calls it, borrowing from Neely Fuller and extending his work. And she's coming up with what she would call a unified field theory. She's got chapter 3 is unified field theory psychiatry. She's coming at this as a trained psychiatrist, as a social and behavioral scientist who deals primarily with children, who understands the importance of symbols in organizing the way humans move through the world. But that chapter, that article, that position on effeminization, bisexuality, and homosexuality, you see those things converge. Among other things, her argument is, oh, and by the way, I'm saying it with Baba J, with Jeremiah Wright, because he is not uncritical of Francis Cress Welsing, but as Paul says, Coates, and he said this in the thing they had, the convening, the book launch, it is a celebratory criticism. In other words, we understand what you're trying to say, Francis, and so I don't agree with you here, or I think you should rethink this here, or maybe let's have dialogue here, but that doesn't displace the fact that you are grounded in a love of Black people as a subset of a love of larger humanity. It's not anti-white, your theory. Well, the most heat that she's gotten, and I think that it is something that is a delicate situation for us to discuss, is on the question of effeminization, homosexuality, bisexuality, which Francis Cress Welsing, among other things, would approach as her argument would be, and is, that there's a socialization that comes from white supremacy. See, with the unified theory, what she's saying is at the center of whiteness is white maleness. And the biggest threat to whiteness is the disappearance of whiteness. And for them, for white people, they construct whiteness as, the label whiteness, as tied to their biological existence. And by that meaning, we're all in these bodies, whatever else we are, spirit, whatever, the bodies are here. And how our bodies present to ourselves and each other become the central way that whiteness defines itself in the world and defines all the rest of us. So whiteness and Blackness can't be reduced to a larger humanity, because human means white. This is Sylvia Wynter in them. And so at the periphery of white humanity is Blackness. And at the edge of the periphery of Blackness is Black maleness, because it's the white man who sees himself. And all you got to do to see that is all these raft of laws they're passing in these state legislatures, these anti-abortion laws. In fact, you all saw Roland covered it in Idaho. Was it Idaho? I know I saw it first in Tennessee last week, where they've introduced a bill in the state legislature, and it's being introduced other places, modeled on the Texas bill, that basically says if a man rapes a woman and that woman chooses to terminate the pregnancy, the family of the man or his family, can sue that woman. Wait, you rape if she terminates the pregnancy? I said, wait. I said, but that's because at the center of whiteness is white maleness. And so at the center of white maleness, white women aren't human. The human is the white man. The second tier human is the white woman. And then and the way they define whiteness, any encroachment on whiteness becomes a threat to white people, as Chuck D, who writes the entertainment part of the tribute in the Osiris papers, says, when you borrowed from Fear of a Black Planet, when you got Francis on there saying white man, Black woman, white baby, then you say Black man, white woman, Black baby, you've defined Blackness as any instance of interfering with your bloodline. She writes about the Nazis in here and anti-Semitism coming out of whiteness. And so all that I said to say that there needs to be a critical engagement with her position on gender, because those people who would say, well, there is a biological nature to this and component to this, number one, and I would be one of those people to say that, and I never heard Francis say, anybody should be harmed or put to death or be put in harm's way, because anybody, regardless of their sexual orientation, if you're a person of African descent, you're going to catch hell, and that'll just be an enhancement to the hell you're going to catch from being Black, which is the point Jeremiah Wright makes when it comes to Christianity. He said, my Christian minister friends, some of them came at me because I supported the Million Man March and Farrakhan's a Muslim. He said, look on your driver's license. Does it say Christian or does it say Black? He said, when Rodney King was getting his head beat in, was he on the ground? It wouldn't have mattered if he had said, alhamdulillah, or not. If he had said, oh my God, Jesus Christ saved me. He's Black. That's why he's beating his ass. So let's be very clear about that. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make, though, when it comes to gender is that, number one, the question of biology is a difficult question. I mean, at least for some people, not for me, but socialization as well. Well, let's say it is socialization. What is the challenge we have for Francis Cress Welsing and many other folks who would take this position? The issue of sex has to do with reproduction. People say, well, then, there are plenty of babies. You ain't gotta, you don't have to say that people shouldn't be gay, or no, that's not really what's being said. But there's also the question of effeminization, men in dresses. Because remember now, part of Cress Welsing's thing is, I'm looking at symbols. I'm a trained psychiatrist. I deal with children. I understand the importance of images. I understand the importance of symbols, why societies create them, how they socialize. And when you see a man in a dress, and then you say, well, they just picked to be in that dress. I'm a psychiatrist. I want to know about their childhood. And then people say, well, hold on now. Either you believe in training or not. And she's hell on Freud. She's hell. In other words, she's saying, I'm using the tools they developed to define humanity on them. And one of the critiques of Cress Welsing is that there isn't an accompanying Black social theory that comes out of her. But I kind of fall short on that. I kind of come up short with that. I think it's there, but you got to read for it sometime. And of course, requires you to read Cress Welsing. But before I say another word at 10 to 11, I want to ask you your experience with Cress Welsing, because you sat with her.
It was transactional, and I had on my journalism cap. So, the first thing I like to do is to find out like who you are, so to find out her father and her father's father were all doctors. That was fascinating to me because, she passed in her 80s. So she was also, in a time when, it wasn't very popular, wasn't very easy to become a doctor, but then her father was a doctor and her grandfather was a doctor. So I spent a little time there. And then picking apart the book, that chapter in particular, because I think two things can be true. There is a socialization, and there is, I think, a way in which we are curated into this acceptance of it's like, and I'm being measured right now because I'm not trying to feed a narrative. I don't want to feed a narrative, but I believe that media curates for us, and that, right?
No question.
A certain phenotype, certain demographic, and I noticed that particularly in news, outside of Bernard Shaw, there's a story arc in who gets to deliver our news, who's Black.
Mm-hmm.
So I sit in spaces where I watch all that. At the same time, people, how you are in the world is good. It's perfect.
No question.
It's the way you are, how you are. If you're happy in your skin inside your body, and I need people to be happy inside their bodies, however they present, however they are.
That's right.
It is absolutely fine.
That's right.
Now, if it is being curated, that's something different. And I think we should all kind of like fight if things are being positioned and this is going to be the popular way, whether we're talking about booty injections, lip injections, skin bleaching, skin darkening, all of those things should come into play. Fashion, why do we wear the things we wear? I love the outfit that you had on. It was so comfortable on Saturday. And I'm like, I want
to. The Nigerians made that outfit. Yes. It's like walking around in your pajamas.
I love it.
I tell people all the time, why would I put a string around my neck? Y'all talking about anti-lynching. You can't tell me why you do it. I'm going to wear my pajamas to work.
But we're curated. You got to look like this. This is proper office. The Crown Act. This is how your hair should be. Right. So everything, we are forced into this lockstep as opposed to just being however we are. Now, if you're telling me that's how you are, be you.
That's right.
But if you're being that because you're socialized to be that, which I think was what Cress Welsing was dealing with in terms of, and the crazy thing is, effeminacy in white men is prevalent. It's prevalent.
No question.
But it's never frowned upon.
No, because they're white men.
It's interesting.
Yeah, so, we know these roads. We pave these roads. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. Yeah, but anyway, yeah.
So I didn't get to have the kind of conversation that we have. Like, I imagine had she lived, because my goal was to digitize that book because I was still in publishing at the time. And so that was a conversation we were having off mic. I was going to come down to DC, spend time with her, get the digital rights, put it out as an ebook, put it out as an audio book, have conversations, do the next book, because that was what we were planning, and she passed. So, you know, that's also sad because I imagine had she lived, we would be doing something like we're doing right here.
Oh, no question about it. She'd
Because
been
this is that, and she would have been down for it.
no
So
question. And she lived very modestly.
yes,
She
and
stayed down the street here,
soft spoken, very very soft spoken, very yes.
but also very intimidating. But see, y'all are both tall and y'all have a presence. Cress Welsing scared people. And the thing used to crack me up about her was she was the sweetest person.
I'm like, I get that too. And I'm like, you know, height shouldn't, you know, height and even ferocity of spirit shouldn't make you scared. Like,
Yeah,
what's the fear? What are you afraid of? Like, what?
I think the fear is y'all walk through the world as full human beings, and that intimidates people who want to, you know, make
What's the
the
fear?
necessary.
Like, what are you afraid of? Like, what you?
But
You I don't know.
what did Mandela make famous quoting somebody else? The fear is that you're greater than what you want to be. In other words, that you have that fuller humanity. That's the fear. I mean, with France, like you said, France, you will see her. In fact, I saw her at Sam Yett's funeral, his funeral. Sam Yett, the author of The Choice, who was an alpha, went to Tennessee State undergrad, and we talked about Sam Yett many times. We were in Northwest DC, and she was there, and we had done the alpha ritual and this kind of thing. I've only done that ritual a few times as an adult, and each time it's usually been as somebody who was a Marion Barry, his funeral, James Donaldson, a few other people, but at any rate. And so after the funeral, we standing there talking. I went up to her and I said, we'd like for you to speak at our Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations conference. We're having our international conference in DC in a few months. And I've been talking to Nzinga Heru, who at that time was, still here, president of ASCAC. And she said, oh, yeah, so I would love to. She just has to call me. Just tell her to call me. LeGrand Clegg, that's my brother. LeGrand Clegg, my man out there in LA, one of the great warriors, intellectual warriors. But anytime you would talk with her, I remember it was at a wedding. There's only one recorded interview and discussion between her and Marimba Ani, the great Marimba Ani, late of Hunter College, of course, now in Atlanta. My Marimba, who's on my dissertation committee, actually brilliant, Irugu, her masterwork, among many other things, The Circle Be Unbroken. They were at a wedding. We were all at with family friends, and they were sitting there talking. They both had on white, and somebody interviewed them. And Marimba's another one who people are scared of. I love it. Marimba, they sitting there talking. Mama Francis is talking, and then Mama Marimba, who talks like this, kind of, And if you are a punk, don't approach Black women. It's just that simple. I mean, if you're a punk, and I don't mean a punk now, I ain't talking about punk in the gendered sense or any of it's not a euphemism. If you're scared, stay away from Black women. I don't care whether it's the club, whether it's the checkout line, whether it's the bus stop, just stay away from Black women. Because, but if you are not scared, then these are the women you want around you. Oh my God, Francis, I wish I could have been there listening to y'all, because I know the energy was insane. And Nzinga Heru was another one of those sisters. In fact, I'm gonna show y'all something.
And she was generous and kind, because I'm thinking back on that interview, and I know I asked some ignorant, in my ignorance questions, and she was very kind enough to even want to take this to the next, to want to work with me. So I just think about that, like the grace that she showed, and the kindness of like, yes, come meet me in my home in DC and let's do this. And I'm mad, not mad, but I guess things happen the way they're supposed to. So I can't, go back and go, oh, I wish I had.
But you could pick it up. I mean, this is third world press. That's how key. I mean, so it's not like, you can't pick that up.
Yeah, look at that. Oh, that's family now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it ain't like you can't, you know what I'm saying? And then, the last thing that I'm aware of that she published, which came the year she made transition, was a piece that we published. And Paul prints our book. Paul's our publisher. The Compass. This is the Journal of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. This is volume 1, number 1. This is the contents, table of contents. You'll see the table of contents there. The first article we published was Jacob Carruthers, a piece that had not been published yet. And we got a lot of that stuff. We got 30-some years of ASCAT conference materials that haven't appeared. We working on it. I mean, that's, again, this platform, we're just getting started. And the second thing we published was, after she said yes, this is 2011. There it is. Our 28th conference, March 19th, 20th. What? That's today. Oh. Ancestors, boy, I tell you, I hadn't even. Wow. That's today. Yo, that's today. Isn't that something? The 2011, March 19th, Howard University, Washington, D.C. banquet, Frances Cress Welsing, M.D. And Nzinga introduced her. Nzinga says, here's what I want to say personally about Dr. Welsing. I read her book, The Kress Theory of Color Confrontation. Let's pause there. It wasn't even a book, it was a pamphlet, 1974. Of course, it's got to be, after the preface and the introduction, the first thing in the ISIS papers, as we remember, The Kress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism, White Supremacy, A Psychogenetic Theory and World Outlook, 1970. This arguably is the article that got the Negro College, in terms of Howard, shook and didn't give her tenure. You see? Because even then and now, you know, shout out to what's her name, White Fragility, and what's his name, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Y'all ain't saying nothing. And in fact, in what's Ibram, the book he wrote? Oh yeah, the How to Be an Anti-Racist book. He talks about being an undergrad in Florida, fam, and reading Frances Cress and being caught up with Frances Cress, but eventually evolving and growing past that. That's kind of just shake my head and laugh. I love Ibram. He's a good brother. Frances Cress Welsing was a trained scholar, third generation MD, grounded in Black community, and not scared. Meaning what? I'm going to speak what I see the way I see it. I'm not angling for a job. I'm not trying to make nobody accept me, and I'm not trying to make nobody scared of me. In other words, see, there's two dimensions to this. Either you want in, or you want people's attention by thinking they should be afraid of you. But either way, they become the center of why you do stuff. Frances Cress Welsing's not doing anything for other people. I mean, look, they Black boys burning. How many more times? You know, how many more times? Daisy and L.C. Bates got a newspaper. That's what propels Daisy Bates to prominence in Arkansas, to have her lead NAACP, to have her be the voice when you read her book, The Long Shadow of Little Rock, with the Little Rock Nine. I mean, Daisy Bates is trusted because she's speaking for Black people. I ain't saying that these people who are speaking to other audiences, to social structure, aren't important. Do what you do. But what you're not going to do is disrespect Frances Cress Welsing. You can agree with her, you can disagree with her, and I think all of those things are important. That's why, again, the Africana Studies framework we are developing is not a unified theory in the sense that it has predictive columns as much as it has an organizational logic that allows us to pursue answers without a unified theory. But what Frances Cress Welsing says is, in fact, let me just read what she writes, because, you know, and Frances Cress Welsing has been caricatured. If you look at chapter 10, Ball Games as Symbols, War of the Balls, August 1976. If y'all saw the film Boomerang with Martin Lawrence, they playing pool. He said, see, the white ball is the last ball, and it beats the black ball. And then Eddie Murphy said, I see where you're going with this. I see where you're going with this. See where, and everybody laughing. It's Frances Cress Welsing. And I always watch that. When I see that scene in Boomerang, I always think to myself, are they putting this in here so that Black people can watch this? And while y'all think this is a joke, they actually got the message in. And I'm thinking, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on it because, oh, David Allen Greer, the comedian. I'm sure there are many people in here right now, people watching this later, who know who David Allen Greer's father was. David Allen Greer's father was the Greer in Greer and Cobb's Black Rage, the book Black Rage, and the Jesus Bag. The two, I know these are trained psychologists. You know what I'm saying? So I'm wondering, when I see that scene in Boomerang, I'm like, did David Allen Greer put that in, or did his daddy tell him to put this in? In other words, because these are colleagues and comrades of Frances Cress Welsing, the Association of Black Psychologists. Other people, Wade Nobles is in the tribute book, the Osiris Papers. But at any rate, Nzinga says, here's what I want to say personally about Dr. Welsing. I read her book. Oh, wait, no, I said, I'm sorry. Here, because she got guns as symbols. I'm sorry, in the ball games as symbols. She makes a distinction symbolically between big brown balls and little white balls. She said the games that white people created or adapted or remixed that have the big brown balls, those are the ones that blacks dominate: football, basketball. The little white balls, baseball, golf. And they always, in golf, it's like pool. What? They sink in their ball into the earth. What is this symbolic? I mean, she's trying to read this as a psychiatrist. What are they doing psychologically with their stick between their legs, hitting this little white ball into the black dirt? I mean, it's like, so she's got the phallic symbols, you know, where she's talking about the Egyptians, but then she looks at the Washington Monument, the Jessamine Memorial, and people say, see, that's crazy. Frances Cress Welsing's a trained psychiatrist. Now, you can dismiss psychiatry, but before you dismiss Frances Cress Welsing, you should do that. Why? Because when you go back and look at Freud, and why y'all still reading Freud with them cigars and them phallic symbols and all this, you know, oh, but when you want to apply that to white people around a theory of race, it's problematic. But the question she raises, and then she gets into the whole alienation question, which is central when you start talking about psychology or psychiatry, you know, and you start thinking, what's this question of, how does this question of alienation infect human beings? And when you start putting patriarchy and phallocentrism, the penis at the center of what it means to be human, then you might get a chapter like chapter 9, which I'm not going to repeat, but you all see the title of that. You say, why you black people around here calling each other MF? And who was the original MF? And then she take it back to Zeus. Because, you know, you start looking at them Greek mythology, you're like, why y'all always rolling up behind women and raping? Where's this rape come from? I mean, because when you start looking at Africana and African systems, you don't see this. Why y'all obsessed with raping people? And sometimes there ain't even got to be no men involved. So she says, here's chapter 3, Unified Field Theory Psychiatry. She says, here's the first sentence. She says, is it conceivable that a black who is also a woman can critique and dismantle the whole of Western psychiatry? That's her objective. That's her objective. A unified theory that will dismantle what they're doing. And she's doing it with the animus against white supremacy, not white individuals, not white people, but the concept that keeps black humanity burning. She says, unless we confront that, we're not going to deal with anything else. Now, when James Baldwin is saying it, it's celebrated. It's on t-shirts. Frances Cress Welsing saying it's a little uncomfortable. See, because Frances Cress Welsing would say that James Baldwin is not a human being. No, she wouldn't. You lying on Frances Cress Welsing. When she made transition, I was asked to write a little piece for Ebony magazine where I tried to bring up and address some of these things in a short form. We can't run from the complicated nature of being human in the world. And as black people, we shouldn't be scared. We shouldn't be scared to critique white supremacy, and we shouldn't be scared to critique each other. Frances Cress Welsing deserves our criticism. And she deserves our criticism in, as Paul said, celebration of her. And that is the best way to affirm this. Anyway, this is what Nzinga said, introducing her that night we were all together in the ballroom at Howard. Blackburn. It was a Blackburn takeover of sorts. Nzinga says, here's what I want to say personally about Dr. Welsing. I read her book, The Kress Theory of Color Confrontation, just when I had begun to work at the International Business Machines Corporation, IBM. These are black women. Gotta love black women, man. It's there where they paint the blue logo on your forehead. They stamp it blue. Everything you have to do has to be done with IBM. And white people didn't want to see black people there at all. It wasn't so much that they didn't want to see black people there. They didn't want to see women there. But the federal government has started giving them money to hire blacks and minorities and women. So if they hired a black woman, they'd get 2 check marks because she was a black and a minority. Anyway, and then continue. She says, anyway, entering this racist environment, not knowing how to really defend myself, I read her book and it made so much sense to me. It made sense why the hairs on the back of my head would raise when I would walk into the room because I knew they had been talking about me. It kind of raised my senses. Wasn't nothing wrong with me. It was something wrong with them because I had the ability to annihilate all of them. We'll pause there. And Nzinga was also tall, her presence filled in the room, you know, and like marimba, like you, It's intimidating. And it ain't often about size. I mean, Sunyata Almond could be intimidating. A lot of those sisters who was with us last week at Hershey, all intimidating. In other words, it's intimidating if you're scared. You're scared of black. Why y'all scared of black women? This way, you read her chapter, the MF and the original MF. Because this whole notion of violence, at the center of whiteness is white maleness. And at the center of white maleness is violence. They want to drop their penis on you in the name of Jesus. Like the Russians just bombed them in Ukraine now. And that ain't bombing Kiev as much. They bombing a little city. They're going to try to starve out the Ukrainians. Why? Because every time you shoot something at somebody, Cress Welsing would say that's like ejaculation with a penis. You know what war is? This is phallocentrism. She's looking for a unified theory of human behavior. And since we got the foot on our neck, she's talking about the contemporary system of white supremacy following behind a man she met in the early 70s, Neely Fuller Jr., who's writing about this United Independent Compensatory Code system and concept. And it says there are 9 areas of human activity that we see white supremacy operate in. And he goes on to list them: economics, education, entertainment, law, labor, politics, religion, sex, war, and counter-war. And what he says is, it's very simple. And Cress Welsing picks up this ball and runs with it. She says, it's very simple. If you not understand white supremacy, racism, what it is, how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Now, do I agree with that? Yes. Do I disagree with that? Yes. At the same time. Why? Because I'm saying in a white supremacist system, you have to understand that. So people say, I don't understand. Why are they passing these laws? Neely Fuller's laughing. Cress Welsing laughing. If you don't understand white supremacy, how it works, how it operates, everything else you think you understand will only confuse you. Why are you talking to them people, Jamie? You better watch Gary Chambers. Gary Chambers like, burn the damn flag. I'm going to light up this spliff and let's get these people registered and let's go change this. And this hillbilly that I'm running against, if I win this primary, you see how he talked when he was a Democrat and now he got an accent like this? If you don't understand how white supremacy works, what it is, how it works, everything else will only confuse you. He's talking like that because you hillbillies think therein lie, I'm white like you. So vote for me, and when I get to D.C., the lobbyists who paid me will make sure, because I am in the party of capital, even though I use the R, they're going to make sure we cut all your benefits. And then when I come back, I'm going to start talking like this again, and you're going to send me back up there, because you confuse that R with the party, when in fact, I represent the party of capital. You stupid. But in other words, white people should be reading this code. You want to stop being white? How to be an anti-racist? Here you go. How to be an anti-racist. How to be an anti-racist. You better put them books down for them people who scared, whose brand is I ain't scared. But if you gotta say you ain't scared, you scared. What you scared of? And Zinga continues. She said, it made so much sense to me. I can't describe it in lay terms. It was just like, hey, we're the majority in the world. She talked about us as being the majority. We weren't minorities that they had defined us as. We weren't the crazy people. They were the crazy people. Plus, Nzinga says, she was a psychiatrist, so she knew crazy when she saw it. But you know, in the black community, black folks ain't supposed to be crazy. Y'all know that in the black community, we don't accept the problem of mental health. They say, you just get on up, wipe the blood off, and keep on stepping, end quote. Which is another reason, Professor Hunter, I'm eternally grateful with everybody else who was there last weekend for you convening us at Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, because you need health. And Nzinga says, but some of us do have problems. We do. But I knew I wasn't one of them. Then Nzinga says, this is where you come, Dr. Welsing. When you think you crazy, you come to ASCAC because you find people as crazy as you are, and you go back and say, oh, ain't nothing wrong with me. You come to Newbie and say, oh, ain't nothing wrong with me. We're not going to agree on everything. We shouldn't. We should have debate and discussion. But what we're not going to do is define ourselves as figments of somebody else's imagination. Anyway, Nzinga says, we did a page in the souvenir book for Dr. Welsing. We talked about her having the courage and the commitment of Africans like her, from Hatshepsut, who said we have to restore that which is in ruins and raise up all that ruin in the ignorance of God. We talked about her as being like Ida B. Wells, a crusader for justice. Pause. Chicago, her father's father, who she never met, knew Ida B. Wells. Just the whole point. They Chicago. Conrad Worrell writes about that in his piece. Who told us to remember the bridges, like Fannie Lou Hamer said, remember the bridges that brought us over and never forget about how we got here. We talked about her in so many ways, but she was a Black woman who was so courageous even in her day and age. When you think about in her generation, what she was able to pass on to the next generation, we're forever indebted to her. If we had 1,000 tongues, we would not be able to say thank you enough. When she talks about ball games, how it all makes sense to us. When she wrote the book, The ISIS Papers, she compared us to ISIS. She's our hero. She saved our lives. She saved our minds. She brought us to where we are today. So we are indebted to her. And then she goes on. And then, of course, then Dr. Welsing gets up, and she had come on just after a panel of young people who had been to Egypt the previous year who came back to report. And Dr. Welsing says, thank you very much. And Zinga, thank you. Just let me warn you, you've already heard the keynote speakers when you heard those children. I will not be able to outdo them. They are our future, and you should be very, very reassured. And she goes on to really get into it. She says, you know, I'm especially dedicating my remarks to some of my ancestors. My paternal grandfather, Dr. Henry Clay Kress, a Chicago physician who died in 1909. My paternal grandmother who raised me in later years, us with my parents. She says she repeated to us over and over again when we were children that your grandfather was a race man, meaning that he prioritized the well-being of Black people. In later years, my father, his son, Dr. Henry Miller Kress, would show me notes that his father had written, one of which said, quote, how dare a person think he is superior because of the color of his skin, his white skin, end quote. She said, now, I never met my grandfather. He died in 1909. I was born in 1935. It astounded me that I would one day be writing about racism / white supremacy. Also, my father, Dr. Henry Miller Kress, the Chicago physician, who, when I first discussed with him my first paper, The Kress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism, White Supremacy, we were sitting at our dining room table. He said, quote, now you have to find out what's in the melanin, end quote. He was the first Black physician to make this statement, leading all to our further investigations of this most important substance. She talks about her mother, who was a school teacher in Chicago. She talks about all the Black public school teachers who in the early 40s were determined that we as Black children were going to learn and contribute to our world. She talks about being baptized in Olivet Baptist Church in Chicago on the Baptist side, and then in the AME Church, christened in the AME Church. And she says, finally, to all those African people who endured the horrors of captivity and enslavement, determined to survive so that we can all be here today to complete the work the great creator of the universe gave us. He goes on. I'm saying that to say we published that. This is probably the last piece that she has published. It's 2016 at her ritual, memorial ritual at Metropolitan AME Church down the street here. I actually, myself, the great Askia Muhammad, who I have to mention. I'm looking at his book over here, The Autobiography of Charles 67X. Next week, we're going to talk about Askia. We have to. He made transition a couple of weeks ago. They had a memorial for him Sunday before last in at Busboys and Poets. I wish I could have been there. I wasn't able to get there. But Askia, myself, broadcast for WPFW, the memorial ritual for Frances Cress Welsing at Metropolitan Baptist Church. Tony Browder, who was very close with her and her community in the community here in DC, mounted that for her. And I decided to say that, Dr. Welsing was grappling with a theory that isn't perfect, that has some really challenging theses, but we can't question her commitment, her intellect, and we certainly can't question the veracity of that theory when it comes to our experience as African people in the modern world. I think she's a theoretician we need to engage.
And like you said, challenge and critique.
That's exactly right.
Because
we owe that to her.
We do. Because ultimately we're all here. And I pulled the global majority from the ISIS papers.
Oh!
So everybody that was wearing a global majority t-shirt last week.
There were a lot, yes.
Yeah. That is in honor of that phrase out of that book.
Yes.
It was the global majority. We're not the minority. So every time somebody calls up or comes on the show, some non-melanated person talking about minorities, I'm like, who are you talking about?
Who are you talking about? Yeah.
Not us.
Not us. Not us. And of course, we have Nubia now. So looking at the homework people are putting out with that debate, we are revolutionary. And of course, the cover of the ISIS papers, now some people can read that.
Wait, hold on.
There's Aset. That's her name. So we see here Aset. Now everybody knows what a triliteral is, right? And there we know that that's the T. And that is just really a phonetic complement. That's three consonants right there. Aset, and you just got the T there. and then you see the egg, and you often see her there. There she is. This is taken from one of the walls in Kemet. And everybody who is, you know, watching this, who is not yet in Nubia or narrative, understand that while union busting sentiments with the rhetoric of we're all together are taking place all over the country, and Howard has now added its name to the Walk of Shame list, while Hampton is giving out full scholarships, room and board to white people from halfway around the world, even as African students trying to get the hell out of the war are being harassed once they get into Poland, or harassed before they get out of Ukraine. Even as the social structure continues to remind us that Black boys, Black girls, Black men, Black women, Black people, Black LGBTQ, Black is all under assault, that we are building that place where that's not our center, that's not our focus. We're in a governance formation. And so the fact that more people now could read this, not only read the book, but translate the cover, oh, we're on the verge. We are on the verge, and we just getting started.